Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman. Tonight, we're going to speak about a few different things. Basically, we're going to share some different techniques that are going to help you in dealing with different symptoms that you may be experiencing in your mind and in your body. These symptoms can range from anything from scruples in the mind to different types of psychosomatic illness that can be described these days under the label TMS, which is gaining traction in various online spaces, and it's something worth studying so that you can better understand the processes that are going on inside your body. What we're going to be speaking about today is understanding a classic Catholic practice in light of the understanding of how the mind works in the sense of intrusive thoughts and psychosomatic symptoms. Because this practice is very important because we have to understand that one of the most essential things we can do in our lives is offer up our sufferings in union with the sufferings of Christ for the good of other people. If we have this capacity, if we understand what this is, we have something that's very important to our spiritual lives, but there's some limitations to this if we don't understand the TMS paradigm, especially with regard to the potential of this technique to, I think in some ways, get us stuck on sufferings that we don't have to have, number one. And this is something that doesn't necessarily only come about as a result in the spiritual life, just because of this kind of modern ideas about how the intrusive thoughts work or how the psychosomatic problems work. It's very important to realize that these things go all the way back to distinctions that were made in Ignatian spirituality. For example, St. Ignatius of Loyola, he taught about some different things that we may encounter in the spiritual life. Namely, there are times when we experience desolation. And he makes it very clear that in these periods of desolation, which involves kind of feeling, discouraged about our spirituality, dry in our prayer, not really feeling much of anything, desolation is something that he says we must actively resist. And that's something, so we have to try to solve this problem. It's very interesting because he proposes a solution that is deeply rooted in what we see in the modern TMS community. He proposes this idea of agere contra, acting against the desolation. And this is exactly what we see in the guidance in the modern TMS community about, being able to act, if they say you have a TMS related back pain, you do the actions you would do if you felt fine. You have TMS related food sensitivities, you eat the food. These are the important things that we have to see. It's very similar to exposure therapy, agere contra. And so we see that in St. Ignatius' teachings, we see this thing where he talks about we don't want to keep desolation that we don't want to have. It's not helpful. But he does say that for example, let's say there is something like a physical pain we just have an injury, or we have something that's like, he describes the dark night of the soul. They say like the dark night, and Father Timothy Gallagher, who's an expert on Ignatian spirituality, says we work against desolation, but we accept the dark night of the soul, these purifications that kind of come from God and are part of the spiritual life. We do accept these kind of experiences of, in types of prayer that are maybe, more challenging and more, that involve these kind of more complex and challenging states of mind. That is something we accept because that is the cross. And we accept the cross, but we work against desolation. And it's very interesting because when we have proper understandings of things, this really allows us to use this technique in a way that we can really integrate it into our lives, and in our especially in our journey when we're suffering from illness, whether it's these mental formations like scruples, or whether it is physical complex things like a physical illness, like a semi-physical psychosomatic illness, a brain-body problem that's related to TMS, which can take many different forms. And you can look at how there's all kinds of symptoms that can be TMS related. So the important thing that we want to understand here is something that was really beautiful. One of my friends, he said, you have to understand a distinction between the cross and the shadow of the cross. And I think that we can look at the desolation as the shadow of the cross, and the cross is the physical, the actual suffering, the actual thing. So it's what I'm getting at here is that it's very important. For example, let's say we are offering up the suffering that comes from our scrupulosity. We also have to remember what scrupulosity is, or else what's going to happen is we are not only going to be, we're going to be kind of lumping the cross and the shadow of the cross together. We're going to be lumping what is dynamic with what is static, and therefore causing symptoms that should be passing to become more permanent. And so we're missing out on a curative factor that is found within the act of offering something up. Because when we offer something up, there is a genuine valuing of the suffering, and it becomes useful. But this usefulness, we could also use this technique in a way to make it valuable to ourselves to experience sufferings that are impermanent. And what I mean by this is that, let's say you are experiencing a TMS-related back pain. If you just think that the back pain is permanent and structural, the pain will persist. Whereas if you offer up pains that you know are impermanent, you can actually create an effect that's very similar to a technique like somatic tracking, or a technique like the DARE responses run toward technique, where we're trying to experience more of what we don't want, and therefore disarming the brain's overreactive, resistant, hypnotic mechanisms that are generating this pain. So it's very interesting to be able to understand the subtleties, and it's very effective because the thing is, if we understand, okay, I'm going to offer up this, let's say you have like an intestinal issue, you say, okay, I'm going to offer up this experience, but you also have this reduction in fear because you know that the experience is not solid. You know that you don't have an actual illness that is static. You have an illness that is a dynamic interplay between your brain and your body. And that changes the way that this offering up can be used, because it can not only be a way of generating, of praying and be participating in the sufferings of Christ. It can also become bound. It can help us to use the run toward technique or the somatic tracking technique in a way that is prayerful, in addition to merely being natural, and it allows for that same effectiveness of those techniques. And I think what's really important is that it harkens back to what Saint Ignatius was speaking about, because Saint Ignatius was saying that we need to act against, the desolation and moving toward wanting more, wanting to use and offer the pains that we know are just these passing dynamic desolations, so to speak, in our mental or physical life. We follow that same principle, but we understand it with greater subtlety. And because what I'm really aiming to say here is that we're getting a little bit more subtle about the type of pain. We don't want to lump all the pains together. We don't want to call all of our pain structural, or else we're going to be hypnotically holding on to pains that we should be dissolving and working through. So that's, I think, an important part of this technique, which allows this deep dynamic interplay that we see. I think is so important to our spiritual lives, that there's always this purification between the traditional teachings of the spiritual life and the other psychological discoveries, and how they mutually purify each other to create greater and greater levels of precision in how we manage our interior experience, so that we can function in a way that is optimal. Of course, if you want to keep experiencing TMS, you can. You can keep suffering if you want. But the thing is, The thing is that what we really want here is there's gonna be other sufferings. You don't have to hold on to your TMS related back pain in order to save souls necessarily. If you wanted to, you could. But the thing is that you really want to get to an understanding that, okay, some of these things are things that we just need to like see through. And offering it up is a way of running toward, and also seeing, because let's say you're experiencing a symptom. Let's say you're experiencing a sensation of scruples, or a sensation that you want to be focusing on the disturbance, and we want to offer up the disturbance. This is very important, especially because scruples can also involve things that we may not want to be thinking about. We might say, okay, yeah, I'm not going to think terrible thoughts as an exposure therapy, but you can definitely licitly desire the disturbance that the thoughts cause. Whatever subtle feeling that is in your head, whatever like yucky feeling you have, like a want to suffer and offer up that suffering, in union with the sufferings of Christ. And so that's a way of running toward it. And when you see the meaning in that, then you're no longer trying to avoid the suffering, and then the suffering can dissolve, become, there could be ways in which you can find a freedom from that. The same thing in your body. Okay, let's say you're experiencing something, okay, you're having pains in your intestine or something like that. So what you do is you want more of that. You offer it up. You offer up that feeling, and then that allows all these things to kind of, because you're not clenching, you're not fighting, you're not flinching, you're allowing this to kind of happen. You're allowing this to become part of the prayer, because you also are seeing the purpose in this. You're not waiting for it to go away, because it's part of the prayer that's valuable to you now. It's very similar as well. This kind of carrying of the cross is very similar to what you hear when people describe, going for a walk with their anxiety, going for a walk with their back pain symptoms. Rather than waiting for the symptom to go away, you bring it along with you. You carry your cross. And this is such a beautiful way to really like up-level these TMS techniques and bring them in line with the traditional spiritual life. And so it's very, these things I think are very important. That I think there's very fruitful areas of cross-pollination between these techniques. So again, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this video. I hope you find some things that you can use with your own sufferings, whatever those sufferings are, to offer them, to be willing, to directly will to offer them to God, so that they can be meaningful, and having that subtlety in our mindset that makes those distinctions between those acute issues, those acute sufferings, and those chronic sufferings, those static sufferings, and those dynamic sufferings, so that we don't perpetuate suffering unnecessarily. Meaning that, you can if you break your foot, you stub your toe and break your foot, okay, yeah, that's an acute or static suffering. But if you just have after your foot heals and you're kind of flinching against hoping that you don't have foot pain, that's a dynamic brain-body thing. If you are, let's say you have one terrible thought, okay, maybe you sinned, to go to confession. But if you're always having intrusive, terrible thoughts and you're going, oh, I don't want this, and it's becoming a major life problem, then it's a chronic or dynamic thing, because you're flinching against them, that they're popping up so much. So it's not that there's something wrong with you. We have to realize there's nothing. Like sometimes it's not the cross. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with you. So there's not really something broken in the foot. Sometimes it's not really something wrong with you mentally. Now maybe you didn't really sin. Maybe it's just the shadow of the cross. But the shadow, we can offer up the suffering of that shadow as well. And we offer up the suffering of the cross and the shadow of the cross, and we understand both of those realities, and we have a much deeper understanding of how to use the offering it up technique as a means of running toward our perceived danger symptoms and our real life symptoms. So I hope that this is a helpful video to you in this regard.